Hey folks, John here, Old Hickory Forge. Welcome back. If it's your first time here, welcome. So what's going on today, I'm out here in the workshop getting moving on a project that I'm pretty stinking excited about. What I want to make is a Zulu iklwa or iklwa. I'm not entirely sure what the correct way to pronounce it is. You know, I'm a white guy from the mountains of North Carolina. I'm not African in any sense of the word. However, my girlfriend Julie, who you met in the Viking sword video, her family actually does come from South Africa. And the weapon I'm trying to make is basically a traditional South African short-handled stabbing spear. Last year for Christmas, I made one for her parents as a gift, and by the time I was done with it, I was just really in love with the weapon. I was like, man, this thing is just so cool. I gotta have one of these. So that's what we're getting started on today. I got a real nice piece of stabilized ostrich bone we're gonna be making the haft out of. And for the blade, we're gonna be cooking up some Damascus. So if you wanna check it out, stick around. Normally the first step when you're making Damascus or pattern welded steel is to go ahead and clean off each individual piece on both sides before you tack the billet together and then go in for your forge weld. And I actually haven't done that. You know, there's still mill scale and some rust on all these pieces, and that's because I want to try something. So what I got here is muriatic acid. I use this for descaling my hammerheads after heat treat so they shine up really nicely with a wire brush. I've also seen people use this as a pickling solution for, you know, removing mill scale from steel to clean it up for welding and everything. So in theory, if we stick our billet in there and leave it for a day or two, the acid should get in between all the layers and clean the surfaces well enough for a forge weld to take. You know, I've been wanting to try this because the initial cleanup on a Damascus billet is really my least favorite part of the whole process. It's, you know, it's tedious, it's boring. And since this is a personal project, if I'm going to experiment, now's the time to do it. So it'll either work or I'm about to waste $100 worth of steel. Only one way to find out. Alrighty, so our billet's been in here for a little over 24 hours. You know, it looks pretty clean from here. All the rust and mill scale and whatnot appears to be gone. So we'll toss that baby in a baking soda bath real quick like and get it in the forge. I got a little bit of heat. We'll just throw some flux on this guy. And bring it up to weld heat nice and slow. All right, first weld, here we go. I've taken 4 heats on this billet. I did 2 welding heats using flux, and then I just worked it good and hot to try to consolidate and square everything up. It felt pretty good, you know, it felt like the weld stuck. We won't know for sure until we go to actually cut into it and look at it. That billet's gonna need to cool off for a little while before we can keep working with it, so I am gonna work on some Etsy orders real quick. After hanging and wedging and sanding and charring and all that, my hammers get an overnight soak in boiled linseed oil. Really lets it soak into the wood and help preserve and protect it. So tomorrow morning, these guys will be cleaned up, packed up, and sent off to their new homes. But let's check out our billet. It's about 95% welded. These cold shuts over here on this side are from where, whenever I laid this down on the welding table to tack it together, this whole side was flush. You can see that welded up beautifully. But because the bars were slightly differing in width, some of them were sticking out above the others, and as I forged in this side, they kind of folded on top of each other rather than weld together. That happens sometimes. It's not super uncommon, but all in all, I'm going to call the acid bath a success because that thing is, you know, welded together. By the time we get done with all our cuts and folds, this is only 24 layers. We're going to fold it 3 more times, so by the time we get done with all that, that's going to be long gone, so it's nothing I'm worried about. I took a quick pass on the surface grinding attachment on the 2x72 to show you what I'm talking about. You see these gray lines in between the layers? That's from where the different widths of the bars kind of smushed on top of each other rather than weld together. This could have been avoided if all my bars would have been the same width starting out, and that's usually not a problem, so it's, you know, not something I thought I would have to deal with doing this. But just to be safe, now that I think about it, I'm going to go ahead and grind all those out. And then go ahead and face off one side before I go in for my next forge weld. After a few more passes with the surface grinder and after taking a total of like maybe a little less than 1/8 of an inch of material, we're through all those cold shuts. We're down to good material pretty much the whole way up and down this side. A few little pock marks here and there, but that's nothing to worry about. And I got this other side faced off as well, so we'll cut this sucker in half, restack it, forge weld it again. That'll give us 48 layers, and we'll do that 2 more times, and that'll give us a total of 192, and then we can actually start making the blade. All right, it's a couple of days later. I'm finally getting another chance to work on this project, but we've gotten all the forge welding done. Our billet's up to 192 layers. It's looking pretty good. I kind of glanced over that because you've seen me do it a million times, and with random Damascus, it's really just, clean stack weld until you get it where you want it. There's lots more complicated ways to do it, but with random pattern, that's pretty much the gist of it. So before we go after making the blade, I want to go ahead and tackle how we're going to be doing the haft. I've got the ostrich bone marked where I want to cut it. This back here is going to become the haft of the spear. Something you always kind of have to contend with when using bone is the cavity on the inside. You can fill it with epoxy. On a piece this big, I don't want to do that, so I've got a 1/2-inch wooden dowel, and once we get a look at how big the cavity on the inside is there, we'll shape that dowel down to fit down to the inside of it. We'll glue it in there, and that way whenever it comes time to fit the tang of the spear in there, we can drill it and broach it as if it was a block of wood a lot easier. You get the idea. It's got a bunch of gunk on the inside. I wasn't expecting that. Normally when you buy stabilized bone, it's hollowed out, but I guess with the ostrich bone, they don't do that. Alrighty, so that was not a very pleasant task. To get all that gunk and crap out of there, I used that dowel rod and just kind of jammed it in and out of there and then sprayed it out with the hose and did that over and over again until it was clean. Much bigger cavity than I was expecting, actually, which is a good thing because now we can make a much bigger, tang for the spear, which will make it stronger. Even though this is going to be a show piece, it's just going to hang on the wall. Unless somebody breaks into my house and this is the first thing I grab, it's never actually going to be used, but it's always better to overbuild than to underbuild. Downside of finding out that cavity is too big is my plan of using the dowel rod as kind of a filler material isn't going to work. It's just not big enough. So what I've got here is one of my hickory hammer handle blanks, and we're essentially going to shape out an insert that we can jam down into the bone that's going to fit there nice and snug. And we'll just give it a few love taps, make sure it's all the way in there. Again, we don't want to force it and crack the bone, so be gentle. All right, so we got our wooden core and our spear. It's looking pretty good. Now it's time to start thinking about the overall construction of the weapon. So the next piece we need to go ahead and make is the spearhead. And then how I want to handle the transition from the bone to the spearhead is I want to make a wooden spacer, so to speak, that the tang will go through that will be shaped out into kind of a more traditional spear socket shape, so it'll be a nice smooth transition. And then we're actually going to be covering it in rabbit fur. I think that'll look really nice. But we got our Damascus posted up, ready to go. Let's get the forge burning. So we got the billet thinned out. It's about 3/8 of an inch thick right now. So now we'll start forging in the profile of the spearhead. Alright, so we got the blade shape roughed out using the press and the power hammer. We got about 8 inches of tang and about 12 inches of blade. So now we're going to move into some hand work, do some hand beveling, try to make the blade wider, refine the shape of the tip and all that. I was a bit worried that I didn't have enough material to start with. That block was about 1 3/4 square, and I started with 4 inches, but we still have, quite a bit of thickness to work out of this thing. So nothing to it, really. So I've thought about it, and I'm going to go ahead and go straight into heat treat from here since there's no hand work that's going to need to be done. And you know, it's kind of hard to find time to devote specifically to this project, but I can heat treat it now, let it temper while I go through my day's work, and then whenever I can squeeze in an hour or two on the grinder to work on it, that'll be a lot easier to get the project done. Here we go. Since this is Damascus, just, rusty parts 50. It's a few days later. I'm finally getting another chance to work on this thing, but it's been through the quenching and tempering process now, so heat treat is done, and we're ready to hit the grinder. Got a good sharp 36 grit posted up, and we're just going to get after it. Grinding a spearhead is a lot like grinding a dagger blade. You know, you got 4 bevels to worry about and everything, and a medial ridge you're trying to keep straight. So it can be kind of challenging until you kind of get set into your rhythm. So I've still got plenty to work out on the edges. I'm just going to keep working those bevels in, get the medial ridge established, and then I'll tidy up my plunge lines and get ready for hand sanding. So here we are off of the grinder. You know, not perfect, but we're well within the range of what hand sanding is going to fix at this point. So we'll start at 80 grit and go up through 600. Moving right along with the hand sanding, I've got the first side of the blade just about all the way up to 800 grit. Something that was kind of annoying me, I have this thing clamped to a 2x4 in my vise, and I kept having to shift the blade from left to right because, you know, I have to hold my sanding stick at an angle and it was hitting the side of the board. So I had a big brain moment and remembered that I own a bandsaw. I traced out the outline of the spear and cut it out, and now I can sand both sides more or less at the same time, so learn from my mistakes. After a few hours of hand sanding, we got the whole spearhead up to 800 grit, so let's get it in some acid and check out the pattern. You know, I don't love it, but I also don't hate it. I do kind of like the bold look of the lower layer count. I think what actually happened, I've been working on this just kind of in my spare time over the course of the last few weeks, and I think I lost track of my forge welds, and I've actually done one less than I thought I had. So instead of being 192 layers, this is actually only 96. Like, it looks a lot more like 96 layer Damascus than it does 192. But I do dig the bold pattern, especially for a piece that's ultimately going to be a wall hanger. And with the kind of primal look I'm going for overall with the ostrich bone and everything, I think it's going to complement it really well. So I'm definitely not tossing this and starting over or anything. But let's keep moving. So I got the slot for the tang carved out with the router. That thing's going to be a real game changer for doing 2-piece handles because that took like 10 seconds and, you know, it's a really good fit. Then I threw some epoxy on there and gently brought the ram of the press down. We'll let that set up and we'll get the collar shaped out. And while that's setting up, we'll start drilling into the wooden core in our bone to make room for the tang of the spear. Nothing to it, really. I managed to hog out quite a bit with the drill bit, but we're still going to have to do some hand broaching to make it fit good. So now you can kind of get an idea of how the spear is going to come together. You know, we got our tang down into the bone. We got the piece for our collar made. Next thing we got to do is shape this out so all the lines flow nice and smooth. So I got everything married up. It's looking real good. I did have to do a little bit of grinding down here on the bone just to make the lines flow the way I wanted them to. But bone takes a polish really, really easily. You basically just sand it up to about 220 grit and then buff it, and it's good as new. So nothing to it really. But before we permanently affix anything together, the blade needs to be completely done. So we're going to do one more etching cycle and get that bad boy sharpened, and then we'll get this thing put together. We got it sharpened. Let's check the edges. Give it the old paper test. This side. Ain't bad. Last step before we're done with this thing, I'm just putting a bit of rabbit fur up around the wooden collar. This is just for decoration. This isn't a structural piece at all. You know, back in the old days, as far as I know, the haft would have been made of wood, not bone, first of all. and then they would take wet rawhide and wrap it around the end of the wood where the tang of the spear went in to help keep the wood from splitting and keep everything tight and all that. I really couldn't find a whole lot of good info on this weapon, historically speaking, whenever I was doing my research for this project. The best resource I came across was a video by Scala Gladiatorio where he talked about it, which I'll link down below. But if anybody knows any good books or other resources on, traditional historical African weaponry, drop them down in the comments because I'd love to learn more. So there we go. One Zulu iklwa, or iklwa. I'm still not entirely sure what the correct way to pronounce it is. If you know, let me know down in the comments. I did read somewhere that it's actually named after the sound it makes whenever you stick it into somebody and then pull it out. I don't know if that's true or not, but if it is, that's pretty stinking cool. Like I said at the start of the video, I'm a white guy from the mountains of North Carolina. I don't claim to be an expert or even remotely knowledgeable on African historical weaponry or anything like that. I just, I saw this, I thought it was cool, and I wanted to make one, so here's what we got. The overall dimensions on this particular iklwa is about 35 inches, so just a hair under 3 feet. We have 13.5 inches of the spearhead and 21.5 inches of the ostrich bone haft. I don't know if that's historically accurate or anything like that. From what I could find, there wasn't any one standard size they were made to or anything like that. But overall, it's just a really ingenious weapon design in my opinion. It was kind of meant to be utilized in a close quarter shield wall formation. So if you're holding it up here, you essentially have a short sword or a very large dagger. But of course, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Eventually your shield wall is going to break up and get dispersed, and you might need a little bit more range. So you could hold it from back here, you could swing it. So you have a lot of the same capabilities that you would have on something like a European longsword, on a weapon that's a lot quicker and easier to produce and to arm a large number of men with. So like I said, I made one of these last year for my in-laws, and I really just fell in love with the weapon, and I've been wanting to make one ever since, so I'm glad to have it. So that's all I got for you. I hope you had as much fun watching me make this thing as I did making it, because I really enjoyed this process. Big shout out to my good buddy Steve Katz of the Safari Bladesmith. I'll link his Instagram down below. He's a native South African who specializes in this type of weaponry, and he gave me, a lot of pointers that really helped me get my bearings with this project. But, if you want to stay up to date with the day-to-day goings-on here at the shop, Instagram is the best place. There will be a link to that in the description, as well as the Etsy if you'd like to purchase any of my work, and the Patreon if you'd like to support the channel. The next video is actually going to be a Patreon giveaway, so if you want to get on that, now's the time. But that's all I got for you, and y'all take care.